What dark secret are you hiding from everyone? Story 1. A man broke into my home about 10 years ago. Well, kind of. He knocked, I answered the door, and he pushed his way in. He spoke about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and tried to extort me for protection, or he and his brothers of doom would come and kill me. He was huge. Ex-Navy, if he was to be believed. Drunk as hell, hand covered in blood holding a broken bottle. I was terrified. I told him to leave. He wouldn't. He was getting aggressive. I told him I would splatter his brains against the wall if he didn't. I didn't have a gun at the time. Anyway, he didn't leave. I went into my kitchen and grabbed a knife and sliced at him a few times. He staggered away, seemingly okay. I assumed he was all right, just wounded a bit. I never saw him again. A neighbor told me days later a man was found dead, some wounds on his arms. I can only guess he bled out, but I never got questioned somehow. Story 2. When I was young, probably around age 9 or 10, I was walking home with my dog from a house around the block when he cut the corner and walked diagonally through the yard of this super mean old lady who lived at the end of your street. She was in her yard at the time tending to these really fancy-looking rose bushes she had growing in beds along the border with her neighbor. My dog was a very friendly golden retriever who didn't even really come near her and certainly didn't do anything threatening, but she sprayed the fuck out of him with some kind of insecticide or other chemical she was using on her roses. I ran back home with the dog and hosed him off. He coughed a bunch, but seemed otherwise fine. I didn't tell my parents because somehow I thought I was going to get into trouble for letting the dog walk in her yard. I'm glad I didn't tell them though, because I decided that night to sneak downstairs, out the half-bath window, and down the street to her yard where I cut down every goddamn rose bush I could get my hands on. Story 3. When I was younger, I lived with my grandmother. Not long after I turned 18, her health started to decline. That sort of decline that you know means she won't be around for much longer. Over the months, I did my best to take care of her, getting her to the hospital when she needed, and other things. We had someone coming every day to help her with things I couldn't. Well, what my family doesn't know is that the night she passed, I was in the living room watching TV. My dog was in bed with my grandma, and I started to hear him whimper and bark. I knew what was happening. I knew that if I acted I could potentially save her. I didn't want to watch her suffer anymore though, to watch her live with so much pain and unable to do anything for herself anymore. So I made the choice to let her pass before making any calls. She lived 92 years, and the only regret I have is that she passed a month after I would have graduated if I hadn't been kicked out of school. She had been in good enough health at the time to go to my graduation. I still kick myself for how stupid I was back then. Story 4. I once found a dead body in my grandparents' farm fields around 11 years ago. Well, me and my cousin. The body was placed deep in the farm under a tree. We didn't recognize the body. It was a man with a black shirt and I think brown pants with no shoes. He was probably dead for a day when we found him. His skin was gray and greenish. His body was inflamed, and there were a lot of flies. It quiet, but after some moments of shock and staring at the body, then back at each other with my cousin, we decided to bury the body. Me and my cousin were extremely introverted and arrogant at the same time. I can't remember exactly why, but we just straight up ripped off the movies, and with respect buried the body like grown-ups. I stayed with the body while my cousin went to bring a shovel. We even prayed for him. I was 11 and my cousin was 12. We collected our thoughts and decided to look around for clues to solve the dead body, like it was a detective movie, and we were serious. We found nothing unusual, and had a bit of regret because we didn't check if he was murdered with something before burying him. We first decided to tell the family, but as self-contained as we decided after, to see if any news or something would come up about a man missing around the village the farm was in. We asked around about workers and other field workers, seeing if they saw someone with a black shirt go deep into the farmlands. Nothing. Apparently no worker was supposed to be in our farm around those times. And no one saw or knew anything about a black shirt man going there or being missing. So we decided again to wait and see if we weren't there would anything come up at all. We didn't even think that if something did come up, we couldn't reveal that we found him and buried him because we would get asked why we didn't share earlier. To this day, there has not been a single report or mention of someone missing or dead around the village that would resemble what we found at that time or location. My cousin and I are very close, and we still haven't told anyone and swore to keep this secret forever until something comes up about him. At this point, because we were stupid and kept it this far. My Reddit information about my IRL identity is pretty hidden, so it's safe to assume this will come up just as a story. We visit the grave of that man every time we go to our grandparents' farm. It's deep enough that rarely anyone or farm workers go there, so it's still hidden and only known to me and my cousin and to all of you now. But you guys still don't know the country or the village or the farm, so it's still hidden. We still look around for clues for who might this man be in secret. Story 5. I'm convinced a neighbor poisoned our family dog. We got her when I was in 2nd grade. The poisoning happened when I was in college. They left notes on our door threatening to hurt the dog if she shit in their yard again, but our dog never went to their yard. Anyhow, she fell very ill very fast. She was in intense pain from her insides. She'd let out screams in pain. I don't know if you have ever heard a dog scream. That's the best I can describe it. It wasn't a cry, howl, or bark, it was a haunting scream. She couldn't get comfortable. I'd hold her to try to comfort her, and she'd be okay for a few seconds, and then another scream. We had to put her down. It was the only humane thing to do. I was devastated. It was like losing a sibling. It still hurts, and this was almost 20 years ago. Not long after that, our area had a natural disaster. The whole city was flooded. We moved back and pretty quickly. My dad was a carpenter, but most people took longer to return, including the neighbor. Let's just say, every snake, reptile, rat, or any other nasty creature that my crazy dad came across, and there was a lot due to the disaster, was brought straight to their yard and inside their house. 4 months. I smile to imagine the house of horrors that they returned to. It still wasn't enough though. In another world I'd love to burn them inside their house. But alas, civilization. Story 6. It's not my secret, but my mom's. And I'm not hiding it from everyone, just the person who it potentially matters to the most. When my mom was in high school in the 60s, she had a long-term serious boyfriend named Jimmy. They were each other's first. They were together for years and were planning on getting married. He went away to college, my mom stayed behind, but they were still together. You know what happened next. He cheated and got the new girl pregnant. He comes home to break the news to my mom. Abortion was not legal at the time. He basically says that he wants to be with my mom, but he has no choice but to marry this other girl. My mom was devastated. Here's the secret. My mom was also pregnant by him, but hadn't told him yet. She decided she wasn't ever going to tell him. Jimmy went on to marry the other girl, and never knew my mom was also pregnant. She told me that she later threw herself down a flight of stairs to cause a miscarriage. My mom actually reconnected with Jimmy during the early days of Facebook. She didn't have an account, but asked me to look for him using mine. He was still married to the same person. My mom was married to my dad. They wrote to each other for a while, using my account. Ugh. Signed their messages saying, I love you. My mom passed away a number of years ago. I think about this knowledge I have that Jimmy doesn't. This major life event thing that he doesn't even know happened. That could have changed the trajectory of many lives. I'm certainly not going to tell him. It's not my secret to tell. Story 7. In middle school, I made a smoking pipe out of copper pipe just for fun. I know you should not smoke out of copper, as the fumes are potentially toxic. My stepdad took it from me and started using it. He smoked with it for years. I hated him for physically abusing me, so I never said anything. It's now 30 years later, and he was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's and likely only has a few years to live. I hope he rots in hell. I don't know if it had any effect, but I like to think the copper pipe played a role in his sickness as karma for being an asshole. Story 8. After my parents got divorced, my stepdad basically moved right in and started sexually abusing me. I knew it was wrong deep down somewhere, but figured since he was an adult, he knew what he was doing and to trust him. One night my sister caught him red-handed and flipped out and told my mom. Cops came, and he got arrested. I was only like 9 to 10 years old, so a lot of it is a blur. At first my mom had me sleeping in bed with her at night, and was babying me, and I loved it. One day, months later, we were walking home from school, and we saw me dad's van sitting outside of our house. We weren't allowed in, and we saw garbage bags sitting outside. My dad told us that my mom had called him earlier in the week and told him that if he didn't come and get us, she'd get rid of us. She wouldn't come out and talk to us, and I cried. My dad lived in another state, so this meant we'd have to leave our friends and our hometown. Our friends ran after the van as we drove away. For a few years, she wouldn't talk to us BC. She had allowed my stepdad to come back, and that's why she stayed away. Guess she didn't want to face us after what she'd done. She'd chosen a man who'd abused her child over her own children. Eventually, we had a relationship with her again, but she was so sick. The funny thing is that she's in a really high-up position for one of the largest banks in America. Professionally, people think she's amazing. She's a monster. Story 9. I was being blackmailed by my elderly neighbor. Normally, this didn't entail anything crazy: replace the starter on his car, help his wife with their garden, run him to his doctor's appointments, etc. Normal neighbor stuff. But one day he knocked on my door and told me their collie, Samson, was getting up there in age. He was 14 and had been having some problems: arthritis, incontinence, seizures, etc. He told me they didn't have enough money to put him down and wanted me to do it. I told him, "Well, if you don't have enough money, I definitely don't have enough money." He replies, "You've got that cowboy gun, don't you?" I flat out refused. Samson looked fine to me. I told him I would take Samson, and he said no. He said Samson had a good long life, and he didn't want his final days to be painful. I told him that I couldn't shoot his dog, and he asked me, "Haven't I been good to you, keeping your secret these past few months?" I'm not asking for much, only for mercy for Samson. I reluctantly agreed. The following Sunday, after he and his wife went to church, I went and collected Samson, hopped in my Renault, and we went for a long drive. I got him ice cream and a hamburger and chicken nuggets from McDonald's. I took him to the beach, and he went swimming, and we played two-stick fetch, and it was like he was a puppy again. I thought about leaving him there, and maybe some nice family would find him, but in the end, we hopped in my car and headed to a forest about 20 minutes away. We walked about a mile in, and decided it was far enough. Now it's at this point that I should mention I wasn't a hunter at the time, and didn't really know the anatomy of a dog, and I never had a dog growing up. So I had him lie down, I put the muzzle to his head, looked away, and pulled the trigger. I missed, sort of. I had maimed him, and I had only grabbed one round from the box, and left the rest in the car. I had to finish putting him down with the butt of the rifle. I had intended to bury him, but I was so shook up, I just left. By the time I got home, It was evening time, and I went straight to bed. In the morning, I checked my answering machine, and there was a message from the old man's wife asking if I had seen Samson, and to come next door if I had. I went next door, and Laron answered the door, and I told him about the message. He asked if I had dispatched of him, to which I said yes, and I started welling up. He put his hands on my shoulder, and then gave me the old song and dance about how it was all for the best, and that he had had a long, happy life, and now he wasn't in any more pain. I agreed, and I asked him again about the message on my answering machine, and he said he hadn't told his wife and didn't plan to. He'd rather her not know, and have hoped that maybe he's still out there, which I thought was fucked up, but didn't say anything. A few days later, I crossed paths with her as I was pulling in from work. She asked if I had gotten her message, and I said yes, but that I hadn't seen him. She said her and her granddaughter had been driving all over town looking for him each day. I asked if Laron had been helping search, to which she replied, "Him? Huh. I think he's glad he's run off." She said he wasn't a dog person and hated having the dog hair everywhere. I said, "I'm sure he has a soft spot for him, even if he doesn't admit it." She scoffed. "He's wanted rid of him ever since I got him when we moved in." Now, I had been living there for about 2 years by this point, and I had thought that they hadn't lived there much longer than I had, so the math didn't add up. I lied and said, "Well, I know my grandparents' dog would sometimes get confused and wander off from time to time when he was older. Happens to senior dogs. Maybe Samson wandered off and just forgot how to get home." She said, "Maybe, but he's only 5 and has always been sharp as a tack." I wanted to throw up in my mouth. I thought Samson seemed fine that day, almost puppy-like. He wasn't closing his life with one last burst of joy and energy. He was probably always like this. When I finally realized that Laron just had me murder his wife's dog, one of the nicest, most trusting dogs I'd ever seen, just because he didn't like it, my head began to swim, and I became what I can only describe as lightheaded with rage. I think she noticed this because she asked if I was okay. I said, I think I felt a migraine coming on, and that I was going to go home and go to bed. I never told her the truth, and I never spoke to Laron again. Story 10. Circa 2008, my employer did tuition reimbursement. The deal was you had to maintain a 3.0 or above, and they paid you back for the tuition. You paid at semester start, and at semester end you submitted the grades, and they paid you back. If you had any tuition assistance or anything that got deducted. Well, I studied network security and carried a 4.0 average. I'm not computer illiterate, and the folks in HR were, and I doctored the receipts. I had enough scholarships to cover tuition 100%, and I simply deleted those line items, making it look like I had nothing. I proceeded to get my college 100% paid for by scholarships, and 100% reimbursed too. I banked all that money, and when I graduated I paid off my house, and bought a brand new car. I walked out of college with zero debt at all, a paid-for house, and paid-for car, and $10,000 in cash to boot, and a full-time job with benefits making $80,000 a year. I eventually quit and moved out of state for a better job. And when I heard how hard they got hit in 2020 when the auto industry shut down, I laughed. Thanks for watching.